online and on demand. This is We the People Radio Network.
Welcome back to EttaroLive Digital Basics Wednesday night. We talk all things digital broadcasting, production. We talk about the tools. We talk about the motivation, the inspiration, what you need to get the job done. As we know, fighting the battle, fighting the good fight, becoming the media, that's what it's all about. And that's why WTPRN gave me this forum to share my experiences with you, to learn with you, to bring on guests that are leading in technology or education or inspiration or broadcasting in some way or another, and they come to the show, bring their expertise and experience, and indeed their failures as well, and they learn from all of us, and we learn from them. That's what it's about. Digital Basics Wednesday night, right here on WTPR. And this is Ettaro. You got me. You got my co-host, Kaneda. And now, we got the big gun. Mr. Jack Blood, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Samuel Ettaro. I hope that I can live up to that giant introduction you gave your audience.
Oh, well, certainly, man. I mean, you've been around a long time, Jack, and, I know without a doubt that you have much knowledge and experience to pass along to all of those would-be citizen journalists out there. Jack, how long have you been? Let's lay the groundwork here. Very briefly, give us your background in broadcasting.
Well, sure, Sam. I've been doing radio every day for about 11 years. I've been in the multimedia arts for about 15 to 20 years, from being a lead singer in a rock and roll band in Hollywood to being the behind-the-scenes guy on radio networks to when I couldn't find the right host. Actually, the old saying, if somebody can't do it, then you have to do it. If they can't do it right, you have to do it yourself. And no knock on some of the great people I've worked with, but eventually I got to a point where, hey, if you're not going to talk about this, then I will. I'll be more than happy to do it and use whatever experience I have to get the job done. That's what we do every day.
At what point did you go from production and entertainment to manning the microphone and hosting your first shows?
Sam, I always wanted to work in production. I think that's one of the most unsung jobs there are in radio or in the entertainment business or the media business at large. That's how things really get done. People watch, the big cable TV shows, and they don't really understand that these shows are pre-taped. There are hundreds of people working on the show, writing the script and booking the guests and getting the pertinent points out in front of the host. And I can think of any number of shows to use for an example. And, a lot of times we're compared to people like that. And it's kind of funny because we do what we do on a shoestring budget. I mean, I'd like to see Keith Olbermann work in my world for a day or two and see what he can come up with, But I really like being a producer, and I think other people should really get into that because it's the most fun thing you can do. You can really rock and roll a radio show. You can turn it around. You can inspire it. You can have a say in what's being talked about on that show. And I really enjoyed doing that. But it got to a point for me, especially, I've been doing I did a music show back into the mid-'90s up until the year 2000. It got to a point for me where I couldn't stand seeing what was going on around me anymore. I couldn't sit and give people bread and circus and talk to rock and roll bands and go out with that stream of consciousness thing that I did that I thought was, fun at the time. But I had to get to a point where, hey, look, my community is being shot down around me. I got to stand up. I got to warn the people. And at the time, in the year 2000, 2001, no one was doing this except for on shortwave. There were a couple of people. And I just got to a point, Sam, where I thought, hey, I've got to get out and I've got to use my voice and use whatever I know about all this stuff and get it out on the air. And we've done that, and I think the rest kind of speaks for itself,
Yeah, absolutely. Where was your first show? How did you get launched? Was it locally? Did you jump right into the national?
The first time I was ever on radio, I was a rock and roll correspondent, and I went out on tour with bands called X and DOA and Nina Hagen. I went out and I interviewed the bands,
kidding, really?
and I was on a big college station at the time in Seattle, Washington, back in, I think the year was 1983. It was called KCMU. This is a big station that ended up breaking, bands like Soundgarden and Nirvana. That was the only station you could listen to, and it was great about it was only about 95 watts. And people would listen to it. They'd crank in, they'd turn their radio and their antenna, put the antenna up on their roof and put their arm in a particular angle to get the station. And I realized really at that point, that's about 20 years ago now or more, that, wow, people will listen. If they have something good to listen to, they'll go out of their way to listen to it. And that's kind of been my mantra ever since. I got into radio full-time back in 1995. I answered an ad, Sam, out of a newspaper. Talk about fate. And they were hiring producers. And I hadn't done radio I'd been in the music business stuff. I hadn't done radio for a really long time. And I just got to a point where I wanted to do something, in the media arts again. And I answered the ad. I went in. I not only got the job as producer, but I was promoted to executive producer within about a month. And then within 2 years, I was running the entire company. So, I just really was motivated to get information out to people, and I've worked with some fantastic people over the years, which is also really inspiring to me.
No, yeah, definitely. At what point did your political awakening happen? Was this prior to your going live into radio? Was it part of that process? Was it as you were a musician before?
I always ask everyone else that question, and people, I do some interviews, but I'm not really in a position where people ask me that question, and I've said this on my radio show. I think I was always awake. I believe there is kind of a new pattern in being awake, and you almost are born awake. If you were born any time after the 50s, you might be that kind of a person. And I was always anti-establishment. I always went out and protested. I always went out and stood up for my community. But I really don't think I cared too much about my neighbors. I did it because I cared about myself. And I got to a point where in 2001 after 9/11, and that really did it for me, I realized that, wow, we're all in really big trouble. And if I can't help my neighbors be free, I'll never be free. So in a way, I guess I still do it for myself. But, I realize that, it's so important to try to help other people obtain their freedom, to visualize what it is to be freedom, to legalize it, whatever the catchphrase is today. And that really changed my life around, and I dedicated myself there on out, and probably now for the rest of my life, to trying to get the word out about things and get people educated about what's going on around them. And it's just been amazing ever since we started. It's absolutely monolithic, really, is the best word for it, because it's catching on so much and people are really into it now. And I was hoping and even predicting back in the day that when this becomes a fad, when it becomes cool to be aware of the Constitution, and it becomes cool to have a guy like Ron Paul, leading the charge, or it becomes cool to, know what's going on with the war and know what the doublespeak is and the groupthink is, then we're really going to have something. And I see that happening today.
It's amazing how quick it's going as well. Every day I see more and more talented citizen broadcasters out there doing the job that the mainstream media is either shirking or absolutely just bastardized, and we have, as your new article in Republic magazine states. The Jack has the cover story in the upcoming issue of Republic magazine, and he states it right there. We're preserving the fourth estate by becoming the media. This is true. This really is truly a revolution, what we're seeing. And I'm honored to be part of it. Jack Blood, I'm honored to be talking with you. I'm looking forward to picking your brain here for the next hour or so. We will be taking calls for Mr. Jack Blood. I have a few more questions that I want to chat with Jack about.
I'll answer anything, Sam. They can ask anything.
Oh, man, you might have
It's all out. The underwear is out on the clothesline. We'll go for it.
All right, Kaneda, when we get back, we'll take my co-host back up here into the conversation as well. I got some questions. Jack, when we get back, I'm going to talk with you about that, about defining that, which it is that you were referring to in that article about us becoming the media and preserving the fourth estate here in America. And we were going to talk about the transition from analog technologies when you went back in the day up to the digital revolution that we are experiencing today, how the technologies have helped and, in some cases, maybe have hindered us as well in our efforts to reach the world. Interesting times we live in, and it just gets more interesting day by day. This is EttaroLive, WPPRN, back in a minute with Jack Blood.